October 29th, 1929. Black Tuesday. The day the American dream came crashing down harder than a house of cards in a hurricane. But here's what they don't tell you in school. The Great Depression wasn't just about numbers on a stock ticker. It was about a society that went completely insane. People buried money in their backyards. Families abandoned their children at orphanages because they couldn't feed them. And some folks got so desperate, they literally ate grass to survive. Welcome back to Channel Name. Today we're diving into the real story of the Great Depression, not the sanitized version from your history textbook, but the raw, brutal truth about how America's greatest economic disaster destroyed lives, shattered families, and changed an entire generation forever. This isn't just ancient history. The lessons from this catastrophe are more relevant today than ever. Let's jump in. Picture this. It's 1928, and America is drunk on success. The stock market is climbing higher than a skyscraper, and everyone thinks they're a genius investor. Your barber is giving you stock tips. Your shoe shine boy owns 3 different companies. Even your grandmother is playing the market with her grocery money. They called it the Roaring Twenties for a reason. Jazz music, flapper dresses, and prohibition cocktails were just the soundtrack to the real party, making money faster than you could count it. But here's the terrifying truth. It was all built on lies. People were buying stocks on margin, meaning they'd put down 10% of their own money and borrow the other 90% from banks. So if you wanted to buy $1,000 worth of stock, you only needed $100 cash. When prices went up, you looked like a genius. When they went down, well, you owed money you didn't have. Banks were lending money to anyone with a pulse. Companies were inflating their profits, and the government, they were cheering it all on, convinced that prosperity would last forever. John D. Rockefeller's son was reportedly so confident that he told reporters, "These are days when many are discouraged. In the 93 years of my life, depressions have come and gone. Prosperity has always returned and will again." He said that after the crash had already begun. Even the richest family in America didn't see what was coming. October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. The day reality came knocking with a sledgehammer. The stock market didn't just fall, it went into free fall like a broken elevator. Panic selling created a death spiral that nobody could stop. Men who were millionaires at breakfast were broke by lunch. But here's what really happened that day. Grown men were crying on the trading floor. Phones were ringing off the hook with people screaming, "Sell, sell, sell." Some investors were so overwhelmed they literally fainted from stress. The most haunting image? Crowds gathering outside the New York Stock Exchange, watching their entire life savings disappear in real time. It was like watching a funeral for the American dream. Winston Churchill was actually visiting the New York Stock Exchange that day as a tourist. He later wrote about watching a dozen or so utterly ruined men wandering around like walking ghosts. Even a man who had seen the horrors of World War I was shocked by what he witnessed. By the end of Black Tuesday, October 29th, the market had lost 23% of its value in 2 days. That's like losing nearly a quarter of everything you own in 48 hours. But the crash was just the beginning. The real horror was what came next. The stock market crash was like the first domino falling. What followed was an avalanche of human misery that lasted an entire decade. Banks started failing, not just a few, but thousands. People rushed to withdraw their money, but the banks didn't have it. Why? Because they'd lent it all out for those stock purchases we talked about. When the stocks became worthless, the banks went bankrupt. Here's something that will chill you to the bone. Between 1929 and 1933, 9,000 banks failed. That's nearly 2,000 banks failing every single year. Imagine waking up one morning and finding out your bank had just vanished. Your savings, your mortgage payments, your business loans, all gone. Unemployment skyrocketed from 3% to 25%. 1 in 4 Americans couldn't find work. But those numbers don't tell the human story. Families were evicted from their homes and built shanty towns called Hoovervilles, named mockingly after President Herbert Hoover. These weren't just homeless encampments. They were entire communities of people who had lost everything, living in cardboard boxes and tin shacks. The psychological impact was devastating. Men who had been providers for their families suddenly felt worthless. Suicide rates spiked. Marriage rates plummeted because people couldn't afford weddings. Birth rates dropped because people couldn't afford children. There are documented cases of parents leaving their children at orphanages with notes saying, "We can't feed them anymore." Can you imagine making that choice? When people get desperate, they do desperate things. The Great Depression brought out both the worst and the most resourceful in human nature. People started bartering like it was the Middle Ages again. Doctors were paid in chickens. Teachers received vegetables instead of salaries. Families grew depression gardens and preserved everything they could. But some of the survival stories will break your heart. There are accounts of people eating dandelion soup, making mock apple pie from crackers and lemon juice, and yes, some people actually ate grass when they had nothing else. Children went to school with newspaper stuffed in their shoes because their parents couldn't afford new ones. Families shared single meals among 5 or 6 people. And in the most heartbreaking twist, some people hoarded food obsessively even after the Depression ended. The trauma never fully healed. The psychological scars ran deep. People who lived through the Depression developed what we now call Depression-era habits. Saving every piece of string, reusing everything, and never throwing anything away, just in case. But here's what's remarkable. Communities came together in ways that seem impossible today. Neighbors shared meals, families took in strangers, and people helped each other survive when the government couldn't. The phrase, "Brother, can you spare a dime?" became the unofficial anthem of the era. It wasn't just a song. It was a desperate plea that millions of Americans made every single day. President Herbert Hoover's response to the crisis was, let's call it optimistic. He believed the economy would fix itself if the government just stayed out of the way. He famously said prosperity was just around the corner. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Hoover thought private charities and local governments could handle the crisis. He was wrong. The scale of the disaster was beyond anything America had ever faced. Meanwhile, people were starving. The contrast was obscene. Farmers were dumping milk and destroying crops to keep prices up, while people in cities couldn't afford food. The system had gone completely mad. Then came Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal. FDR didn't just change policy. He changed the entire relationship between the government and the American people. The New Deal created programs that sound radical even today: Social Security, unemployment insurance, federal job programs, and bank deposit insurance. The government became the employer of last resort, putting millions of people to work building roads, dams, and parks. But here's the controversial part. Some historians argue that World War II, not the New Deal, actually ended the Depression. The war created massive government spending and full employment almost overnight. Whether you love or hate FDR's policies, one thing is undeniable. The Great Depression permanently changed what Americans expected from their government. Before 1929, most people believed you were on your own. After 1933, people expected the government to step in during crises. The Great Depression officially ended around 1939, but its psychological wounds lasted generations. People who lived through it never fully recovered from the trauma. Children who grew up during the Depression became adults who hoarded food, never threw anything away, and lived in constant fear of economic collapse. These habits were passed down to their children and grandchildren. There are families today whose grandparents still wash and reuse aluminum foil, save every jar and container, and refuse to throw away anything that might be useful someday. The Depression created a generation that could never feel truly secure again. The social impact was equally lasting. The Depression destroyed trust in banks, corporations, and the free market system. It created a generation that believed the government had a responsibility to protect people from economic disaster. But it also created incredible resilience. People who survived the Depression developed an unshakable work ethic, resourcefulness, and appreciation for simple things that modern Americans often take for granted. Many Depression survivors lived by the motto, use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. They learned to find joy in small pleasures and to never waste anything. The most haunting legacy? Many Depression survivors never fully believed the good times would last. Even when they became prosperous later in life, they always kept emergency supplies, extra savings, and backup plans because they knew from experience that everything could disappear overnight. The Great Depression wasn't just an economic crisis. It was a psychological earthquake that reshaped American society forever. It destroyed the myth that hard work alone guarantees success, and it proved that even the wealthiest, most powerful nation on earth could collapse almost overnight. But it also showed the incredible resilience of the human spirit. People found ways to survive, to help each other, and to rebuild their lives from nothing. The lessons from the Great Depression are more relevant today than ever. We live in an era of economic uncertainty, rising inequality, and financial instability. The warning signs that preceded 1929, massive debt, speculative bubbles, and blind faith in endless growth, sound eerily familiar. The people who lived through the Depression have a message for us. Don't take prosperity for granted. Save what you can. Help your neighbors. And remember that the only thing that's truly certain is that nothing is certain. What's the most important lesson you think we should learn from the Great Depression? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video opened your eyes to how quickly everything can change, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden truths of history. Next week, we're exploring how World War II actually saved America from the Depression, and why some economists argue that only massive government spending can prevent another economic collapse.